So I'm going to be talking about preventing brute force authentication attempts with Spring Security. Spring Security is a really nice tool for something like this, where a user might try to enumerate through every single possible password or username. So essentially, if an IP address, like a single IP address, tries to do this, the program that will be built here will block it for 24 hours. This is done through authentication listeners, and those authentication listeners call a service called login attempt service. And login attempt service handles the login succeeded and login failed method calls of that service and puts them into something called attempts cache, which is built from a cache builder, which elapses for a time unit of 1 day. So the authentication failure event, essentially what happens is it auto-wires the login attempt service. I already talked a little bit about that. But it is essentially it implements an application listener. So it is an application listener that takes authentication failure bad credential events, and it auto-wires that service. I talked about that. An authentication failure bad credential event method handler resides within this listener. So inside this listener, it grabs the remote IP address, and then it passes that IP address to the lower level service. And that IP address serves as the key to that cache that I was talking about earlier. If it succeeds, it's similar for this. It is an application listener. And then it looks for success events instead, and then there's a method in there that grabs that IP address and then passes it to the lower level service to see if it succeeds. I'm just going to go straight into the code for these two, since we talked about both the authentication listeners. So if I go in here and do listeners, let's do authentication listeners. Yeah, so see, there's the authentication failure listener and the authentication success listener. So this is the failure listener. It's a component. It implements an application listener. It has the bad credential event. So in here's this login attempt service that I was talking about. So this is what actually gets passed to the lower level service, is this remote address. So that's the IP address to make sure that it's not being failed 10 times or whatever the max amount of times you want, so they can't brute force you. So let's go to the success one. So this is the success one. You can see it does the same thing, auto-wires that service. It is an application listener, and then it takes that remote address and then passes it to the lower level service. So let's go to the lower level service. So this lower level service, I talked about this attempt cache a little bit. So it builds this cache, and then it defaults the load to 1. And then if it succeeds, remember from the success, it calls login succeeds. It passes that remote address as the key straight into there, and it'll invalidate that cache. And then if it fails, if I go to the failure listener, you can see that it calls login failed right there. And you can see that it'll get it. If there's an exception thrown, it'll set it equal to 0. It'll add 1 to it, and then it uses the key, which is the IP address, and then the new attempts is stored in there. And then finally, is blocked, max attempts. If you go to the top, it's 10. So aside from this certain service, there's the user detail service that also needs to be modified. So I'll go to this. So the user details service checks if the IP is blocked, essentially. So if it is blocked, then it'll throw the blocked runtime exception, and it needs a special way to grab the client IP address. This is because some network scenarios are a little different than normal, and also we need to modify the web XML file with the request context listener, because we're using this request.get header X forward. So I'll go into the code for that, for the user details service. So my user detail service, so you can see right here, it calls that get client IP method that I was talking about. It uses the login attempt service, and then uses that is blocked method. And then is blocked will essentially check if the IP is blocked or not. And if it's blocked, then it'll throw this blocked exception. I don't think anything else is. Oh yeah, here's the get IP that I was talking about. Request is in there, so since we're using request to get the remote IP address. Okay, so the final thing that needs to be done is we need to check that the actual exception that is thrown that ends up having the message of blocked actually shows up. So what we're going to do in our custom authentication failure handler is we're going to add that. So you can see inside here, if the message is equal to block, ignore the case, then get the blocked message, and then in this set attributes, it sets the attribute to error message, and that was set up here. So that's how that's handled. So let's run the server and see what happens when we do this 11 times and fail. So I'm running the server. I'll grab the module and make sure I remember. Yeah, if you ever forget the module name, you can just grab it right here. Or the path name for that matter. Okay, just started. I ran the thime leaf stuff. It's a basic thime leaf application if you didn't know that. Alright. So let's sign up. Put foo at gmail.com. I'm not going to use two-step. Apparently it's just too weak. So capital F.
एक्सट्रीम क्या है उसको ऑलमोस्ट मुझसे डबल मार्क्स होगा यहाँ सर या यहाँ पर सडन में मुझे डिटेल में कैसे कोई एक्सप्लेन करते हो या फिर हाँ कैसे मैनेज होता है इट्स नॉट इट्स जस्ट टू राइट होता है मतलब एक्सप्लेनेशन देना, प्रूफ करना, अगर तुम गलत भी हो तुम प्रूफ कर सकते हो कि हाँ ये ऐसे से क्या है, लेकिन थोड़ा बहुत रॉन्ग है तो भी मार्क्स अच्छे मिलते हैं, बट टीचर्स साइड और राइट आंसर ऐसा नहीं होता। तो ऑब्वियसली और डिमोरलाइजिंग है उनको आके, मतलब टीचर्स होते टीम जिन्हें अपना बेस्ट एफर्ट डाला फिर उसमें कम मार्क्स होगा। तो काफ़ी एक्यूमुलेट होता है, मतलब हाँ वो एक्चुअली वो यहाँ पे कैसा होता है, प्रोफेसर से मिलने को जाना है तो भी पढ़ के जाना पड़ता है, बहुत कुछ पढ़ के जाना पड़ता है। इट्स लाइक कि मतलब वो कन्वर्सेशन करेगा तुम्हारे साथ या फिर मतलब ये हाफ होने वाला क्या बनने वाला है, क्या नहीं करना है। फिर कहते हैं जहाँ से अभी था जो क्लासेस होता होगा फिर अपॉइंटमेंट नहीं करती है, तो हाँ कुछ कंफ्यूज होने से अच्छा है कि
Now let's just type A.
है या तो क्या है टाइम की वो नॉलेज को प्रोसेस करने के लिए उसका टाइम जाता है। मतलब मैं अगर
Should have made it a smaller amount.
घर से लेकर आना तो थोड़ा लाइफ ईजी हो जाता है, और मैं कुछ और चीज़ों पर फोकस कर पाता हूँ। अच्छा क्या
Oh, there we go. This IP has been blocked for 24 hours. So, there's the app. That's how it works. Thank you. Bye.